a fundamental difference between any integrative approach and Western medicine is that, I always look first at what I could take out that might be a barrier or impediment to healing. And in Western medicine, through medical school and residency, I was taught to put things in or do things. And sometimes those are necessary. I'm not discounting that. But then when that went wrong or if a side effect occurred, then we put in more. And we never really thought about what we could take out. And so I think that it's just sort of a cultural norm in the West to say, "Oh, we're aging. What could we do to stop it?"
So, have you ever found yourself thinking about aging with a sense of dread, like it's this inevitable decline that you have to fight against? Or maybe you've been led to believe that the goal is anti-aging, to maintain an image of youth and stop the clock and live to 125 years or more. But what if the whole idea of anti-aging is actually missing the point? What if the real focus should instead be on living well, maximizing your vitality, your energy, and your joy in every stage of life, instead of just counting the years? Well, over the next few months, I'll be joined by Dr. Tanmeet Sethi, and together we'll take you through the 9 mechanisms of aging and explore how you can use simple, actionable steps to enhance your health and your well-being as you age. Dr. Tanmeet Sethi is an integrative and psychedelic medicine physician, author, TEDx speaker, and activist. She's dedicated her career to caring for the most marginalized patients in Seattle's refugee, uninsured, and unhoused populations, as well as global communities that are traumatized by disasters. She's also senior faculty at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine and recently published her first book, Joy is My Justice, Reclaim Yours Now. Dr. Sethi is also a clinical associate professor and primary clinical investigator on psilocybin at the University of Washington. In her clinical practice, she weaves modern and ancient medicine to catalyze profound healing in her patients. Today, in part 1 of this series, we start with the first 3 mechanisms of aging: DNA damage, telomere shortening, and epigenetic changes. In our conversation, Dr. Tanmeet and I explore how DNA damage accumulates over time, how the shortening of telomeres impacts the aging process, and how epigenetic changes can either accelerate or slow aging based on your lifestyle, diet, and stress. We also discuss how Ayurveda and integrative medicine provide practical steps to protect and repair your cells, improve your health, and enhance your overall well-being. This conversation between me and Dr. Tanmeet might just change the way you think about growing older. I'm so excited to share this conversation, the first in a 3-part series where we talk about the mechanisms of aging and what we can do to increase our longevity. I'm Dr. Avanti, and this is The Healing Catalyst. Hi, Tanmeet.
Hi, Avanti.
How are you?
I'm good.
Okay, good. All right, so let's jump in. We're going to talk about the mechanisms of aging, and this is part 1 of a 3-part series because we wanted to go a little deep and sort of explain these mechanisms. And so we're going to jump into mechanisms 1 through 3. But before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit about longevity, aging, sort of like, why is this topic? I mean, it's a very hot topic right now in the wellness world. And I think there's a good reason for that, because we all seem to be living longer, having longer lifespans, but are we living with quality of life? And I think that's where this discussion about longevity has come from. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. Let's take a step back. I feel like there's the health and quality of life, and then there's the preceding conditioning in our mind of what it means to age. So I guess that's a better place maybe for us to start, which is that, in many cultures, elders are considered wiser and more valuable. And in the West, it feels to me like that's not the case, that as we age, we're less productive, quote unquote, less useful, quote unquote. And, that aging is sort of this inevitable decline. Um, and I find it always interesting that when we talk to children, we always say, wow, you're growing.
Mhm.
And then when we talk to people who are adults, we say, "Oh, they really aged." And I'm like, Why is that different?" I mean, they're doing the same
Oh.
thing that children are doing, you know? We're
Mm.
just growing. But that's not to say, I'm not dismissing that as we grow or age, there are health issues that can arise. That's not what I'm saying.
Mhm.
But we tend to focus on the decline, the negativity, the negative side of it, instead of looking at how this could be seen as a beautiful time. And I think that the focus we have now on longevity is beautiful because it's really looking at how do we optimize and maximize this time of our life. I just think that, I don't know what you think, but I think there's a fine line. I don't want to get people in too far of a sort of rabbit hole, a maze of trying to get better at getting older, you know,
Right?
and
Right.
so, that it's a fine line. It's a balance for me. I guess I'll start
Yep.
there, is that I want aging to be looked at as a natural process.
Right.
I want us to think of how to optimize that process and not just accept negative decline. And at the same time, I want us to embrace that as we grow older, we grow in wisdom and beauty in other ways. And, sort of embracing that as well. So I guess that's where I'll start.
Okay, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, the first thing that God, I always love talking to you because you just add this, like, you drop these like pearls of wisdom, and that what you just said about, children versus adults and how we say to kids, "You're growing older. That's so great. You're growing, you're growing, you're growing." But the same thing applied to an adult becomes a negative thing. I just wrote a whole freaking book on longevity and I never thought about it that way. That's genius. I should have talked to you before. No, I'm joking. That's a really great frame to think about. Like, why does it become such a negative thing when we're adults? And again, like you said, it's a fine line because yes, we're aging, the inevitable is that we will all die at some point. But I think it's a really interesting frame and sort of perspective to think about. So thank you for that. That was incredible. To think about it that way. And yeah, I think that the reason, I got so interested in longevity is because, I really started thinking about this project, about writing this book when I was about to turn 50. And that was actually during the pandemic. Those years, like during the really, really intense period of the pandemic. So in 2021, I was turning 50. And I was really sort of reflecting on my life, like, where have I come from? Where am I going? What am I doing? Sort of what's the next phase, my next era, as we would say, right? And I was starting to reflect on all the elders in my family. And, you and I are both South Asian, so we see this in our elders. They're really vibrant. They're doing a lot of
Mhm.
stuff. They are sharp as you can be. And they have this role in our families that is very respected. It's very revered. That's true of all the elders. And so I just started thinking a lot about that and thinking about my own grandfather, my Babaji, and how he was, around the age of probably 60 when he used to come very often to visit, right? Only 10 years younger
I
than I was at
know.
the time, you know, and how robust he was and how healthy he was. And it just was like, I always thought it was so strange to see what I was seeing in Western culture in the ads on TV and in magazines of, orthopedic shoes and, coloring your hair and dentures and all these, devices for walking or, walking sticks or crutch, whatever it was. And it just didn't square for me with what I was seeing at home with people aging. So I think that was an image that always stayed with me. And so I think it's, sort of what you're talking about. It's like what we're surrounded by in Western culture is this idea that aging is going to be this horrible decline and that you are going to have all these things that you're going to need to fix and do because you're just getting older and older and older and you're, just waiting to die sort of
Right.
thing. Right? Which is very sad. Um, and so like, and then, the flip side is that anti-aging sort of stuff. We see that in skincare a lot, or hair care or even supplements in some ways, right?
Mhm.
I really don't like this term anti-aging. I find it very first of all, there's no way you can do that. That's the first thing. It's like a false hope to give to people. So like why do we even say that word? It's like so wrong from my perspective. Um but it also again is like we have to fight against aging. It's like anti something.
It's more of a struggle, right? And more of a race and less of a embracing and how do you find ease and how do you look for the beauty or the way in which you can support this process, right? It's very different to say anti-aging.
Yes, yeah, and so longevity feels like, the better word, and then I think we should also kind of clarify, like, what does actually longevity mean? And I think what we're saying here is we're talking about health span. There's 2 different things. There's lifespan, which is our chronological age, which no matter how hard we try, we cannot stop. We are going to get older every year. Back to your comment of children when they're growing older, we're like, "You're getting older. It's your next birthday." Adults were sort of like, "Yeah, it's your next birthday. You're
Mhm.
declining." um, and so the lifespan, I feel like Western medicine, where what we both were trained in, is very good at extending lifespan for many years.
Yes.
We can keep people alive for a long, 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 long time.
Mhm.
But is their health span equal to their lifespan? And health span is the quality of their life as they get older. And I think the conversation about longevity is really about, can we start to get our health span to equal our lifespan
Mhm.
so that we're living more years with quality of life? That's
Yeah,
really what it comes down to, right?
I agree. I mean, you wrote the book on it. I
Yeah.
agree.
And that's but that's also what we saw in our elders, and I think that's again back to, why I started this project is because I was thinking about the fact that the people that I have grown up with, my elders, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, their health span pretty much correlates with their lifespan. They're pretty healthy until the end. I don't know what you've seen in your family in
It
general.
varies. It
Mhm.
varies. Not
Mhm.
so consistent as what you're saying, but yeah, for some of them.
Mhm. Yeah. And so it's sort of like, well, how do we do that? And I feel like, when I started thinking about Ayurveda and sort of what we do in Ayurveda, it feels like that is what supports health span. And that's what I really found as I started doing research and started writing it, is that really all of the things that we've been doing for 5,000 years in Ayurveda, and actually in many of these ancient healing traditions that, both of us have studied and learned about and, have been exposed to through other practitioners and friends and colleagues, many of these healing systems are really about extending health span. That's really what they are about. And so, why are we missing that in Western medicine? That's what I sort of really struggle with is why is that missing in Western medicine?
I mean, I think part of the reason it's missing is because Western medicine is more about abortive kind of care or stopping something and
Mhm.
less about supporting the fundamental root causes of anything. So, um, a fundamental difference between any integrative approach and Western medicine is that, I always look first at what I could take out that might be a barrier or impediment to healing. And in Western medicine, through medical school and residency, I was taught to put things in or do things. And sometimes those are necessary. I'm not discounting that. But then when that went wrong or if a side effect occurred, then we put in more. And we never really thought about what we could take out. And so I think that it's just sort of a cultural norm in the West to say, "Oh, we're aging. What could we do to stop it?" Instead of how can we support the body through it.
Exactly. And I like that. I think that's the difference. It's the stop versus support,
Hmm.
right? That's really kind of, I mean, in a nutshell, that's the difference is
Yeah.
we're very much taught in Western medicine, let's stop it, let's stop it, let's stop it, whether it's a symptom like a headache or it's a process like aging or any of
Right.
the chronic illnesses that come with aging. It's like, stop it, stop it, stop it, rather than how do we support the healing of this or support the process that is a natural process? So I think that's really what you're kind of saying. Okay, so let's talk about the first mechanism. So, just to give some context to all of the listeners, there are nine, at this time, there are nine sort of mutually agreed upon or generally agreed upon mechanisms of aging that we talk about in Western medicine. And sort of we've really studied these mechanisms and sort of they're looked at as the main reasons that we age. And so these are the nine mechanisms that we are going to talk about over the course of, 3 episodes. We're going to break it up into we're going to talk about three at a time. So we're going to talk about mechanisms 1, 2, and 3 today and sort of dive into the science of them because I do think, this is sort of what I always talk about on this podcast is that when you understand the why, it really helps you then really internalize it. And then you're more committed to the what of
Hmm.
how to deal with that. Um, that's how I've always felt. And I always feel that with my students. I don't know what you've seen with your students. And,
Yeah.
it helps to know
It
why.
helps tremendously. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
it's just empowering you. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So it just it puts it into context of like why it matters that you have a routine, a morning routine, or you get sunlight in the morning, all these things that we'll talk about, right? So, okay, so let's jump into mechanism 1, which is the first mechanism of aging is that our DNA gets damaged or the genes that we have, they get damaged. And sort of an overview of this is that, DNA is the blueprint of us. It's what makes us us. And over time, though, as we quote, age chronologically in years, there is damage that will accumulate within the DNA, right? Both internal and external. So it can be internal causes like, mismatched uh, replication, or there can be SNPs in the DNA. There's all kinds of different things that can happen. And that can happen from free radicals. It can happen from just things that go wrong in the cellular process, right?
Hmm.
There's all different reasons that we can have that. There's external sources of DNA damage, whether it's pollution, UV exposure, radiation, any of those things can also damage the DNA. And again, this damage leads to mutations, disruptions in cellular function, which then contributes to physiological aging. So that's sort of the big picture of what DNA damages and how it relates to aging. And free radicals are a big thing that we talk about, right? And so they're unstable molecules that actually damage the DNA. And so again, if you have mutations in DNA that can't replicate properly, there's gene sequences that get read wrong, all those kinds of things. And so you have problems. The switch, sort of the longevity switch here, one of the big ones. And so, in the book, I talk about 5 main longevity switches or sort of areas that we can think about when we're thinking about how to increase our longevity. And the first one is to remove toxins. And I feel like that is a really big one for this specific mechanism is how can we remove toxins that are damaging the DNA?
Yeah. So, this is a huge one because when I think of toxins, I think of toxins in our mind. I think of toxins in our food, toxins in the air, toxins in the sand we play in, toxins in medications and supplements. Um, all of them. And so it's a really big category. and it's individually different for everyone in terms of what toxins are most at play for them.
And it can be very overwhelming for people because they're like, "Oh my god, I am surrounded by toxins everywhere I go. What do I do?" I mean, I have tons of people who will come to me and they're like, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. Like, where do I start?" And I think that that's a big question. Where
Yeah.
do people start? What do you suggest to patients usually?
Yeah, I mean, I usually try to start where there's the least resistance of and
Mhm.
easiest flow. So, what sounds not necessarily easy, but what sounds most doable first. So, for some people, changing food, it just seems too overwhelming right away. And maybe they can start with not using as many plastics in their life. Or for some people, that's very overwhelming. And it might be, talking about stress or maybe there's some real clear toxic relationships in people's lives. So I don't think there's a right answer for that to me. I think that, people need to start where it feels like they have the easiest flow. Because once we change one thing and we feel the effect, it's easier to change other things.
Yeah.
So, how do you go about it? That's
Yeah, I
usually what
mean,
I do.
that's that would be the same approach I take is really what's the path of least resistance, or what I like to say, where can you get a quick win? Because that will really help you keep going, right? And so that I think is really important because I think also in Western culture, we've also been programmed to think that we have to make big, huge changes. We have to overhaul our entire life for it to matter. And that is, again, a bunch of BS that we've been sold, which keeps so many people sick and stressed and scared and full of anxiety of like, I don't know how I can really take back my health into my own hands. And that's really, so much of the work that we both do is like helping empower people to see that they can actually have a real impact on their own health and well-being by doing these small things every day. So I would say go for a quick win, just like you were saying. What's something that would be easy to do that would help you to remove toxins, right? And so we can give you some ideas, right? So again, food. Can you increase the amount of antioxidant rich foods in your diet to help, neutralize those free radicals that are damaging the DNA? That's one way you could think of it. You could also think of it as taking out some of the toxic chemicals or substances that are in foods. How could you reduce those from your diet?
Yeah, no, and just on the lines of food, maybe people are drinking too much alcohol or drinking too many soft drinks, or so really looking at people's days in a more granular way, and really just trying to make those micro changes, like you were saying. Like if you're drinking a Coke every day, then how about trying to drink one every other day first. So really trying to make a difference and move slowly and sustainably.
Right. Rather than saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to get rid of all the sodas I have. I'm not going to eat any sugar. I'm not going to eat any white flour, whatever it is. And you feel like you have to like cut everything from your diet. And you're sort of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Becomes overwhelming. Or you stick to it for a couple of days and then you feel even worse because you couldn't stick to it. And so I think that again, small changes that you're talking about, and we have a whole episode on habits. We'll
That's
link that
true.
that we'll link
Yeah.
in the show notes, where we talked a lot about some of these ideas, these strategies for improving or changing habits or adding habits that you really want to add to support your health. So we'll link that in the show notes. But yeah, so removing toxins can be as easy as doing it in your food. It could be another one is thinking about the skincare products that you're using, anything that you're using on your face, on your body, whether it's the soap you're using to shower or the skincare cleanser you're using or the detergent you're using. You can
Nail
make,
polish. I mean, we
yeah,
could go on
yeah,
and on.
yeah, nail polish, all those kinds of things. What could you change or get rid of? Maybe you're not painting your nails anymore, or there's lots of different ways to do this, right?
Right, exactly.
But I do think that what's really important is that if you are confused about where to start with this whole toxin removal thing, get somebody to guide you. There are
Yeah.
so many practitioners out there, integrative medicine docs that can really help you, Ayurvedic practitioners that can really help you sort of figure out where to start, where sort of your toxic load is really coming from, and what would be a quick win for you. And that might include like running some tests. What are some of the things that you've done with some of your integrative patients who have come in where you've really thought, okay, there's a toxic load issue going on here?
Yeah, well, they're not the testing is not that, perfect when it comes to this, but there are, toxin there are special tests you can do for heavy metals, for different kinds of hormonal imbalances, because actually it's a toxin to have too much estrogen, for instance, that you're not metabolizing. You can look at the liver and the detox system and actually try to see if it's been stressed or taxed. You can look at the gut and you get indicators in the gut that there may be inability to absorb good things and get rid of bad things. So there's a lot of testing you can do to get an idea. But honestly, I work with a lot of people who don't have the resources to buy
Right.
those tests.
Mhm.
And honestly, I go more empirically more often about people having chronic fatigue, feeling
Mhm.
very drained of energy, brain foggy, feeling
Mhm.
like their memory is now lapsing, feeling more
Mhm.
irritable, kind of looking at people's history in a very close, deeper way and seeing that it looks like there's a lot of toxin overload. And then looking at their history. Where do you work? What inhalants are you exposed to? Did you grow up on a farm? Or did you, and relationships, food, diary, all kinds of things. So you can get the majority of your information from a good history if you have a practitioner who knows what to look for.
Which is you made my point exactly, which is because, a lot of people who have been talking about longevity, I'm not gonna name them, but we know them. They're all in this integrative world. They're really into doing all kinds of testing and all kinds of gadgets and, really expensive supplements, and more power to them. That's great. Okay. We have that technology. It's amazing. It's modern medicine. It's great because we need to go in that way. We need to learn all of that. But and also, the whole point of my book is to say, you don't actually need all of that. You
Hmm.
can start simply, and that's exactly what you're speaking to, is that, you as an integrative doc, you are really going by getting into someone's history and really learning what have they been exposed to, what does their day look like, what are the foods they're eating, what are the relationships that they have in their life. These are all the things we talk about in Ayurveda. It's very much the same, right? It's an integrative approach to looking at where are the toxins coming from in your life, because every aspect of life affects your health.
And we've lost a lot of that in medicine, right? I remember all my best teachers would show me in primary care how 80 to 90% of the answer, the diagnosis is in the history, and the physical was just to confirm it. And so, I don't see that as much anymore. We don't have the time or people don't know what to look for. So,
Right. I mean, it's an art of medicine. That's why it's not just a science. It is an art. There
yes.
is an art to asking questions. There is an art to the body language of sitting with a patient and watching how they're moving, what is their facial expression when you ask them about their relationships. Do they cringe? Do they, sort of take a pause? You know what to ask then because you see a hesitation. Like these are the things that are the art of medicine that so many of us who are our age were really trained much better in, and probably our predecessors even more so than us. They really went by clinical examination and history taking because they didn't have all these fancy tests, right? So it really kind of comes back to that same issue we were talking about at the beginning of, this whole physiological aging process versus chronological aging, but then the idea of lifespan versus health span, right? Technology, medical technology has allowed us to increase lifespan, increase it, increase it, increase it. but are we increasing health span? And so it's like this, like you said, there's a fine line because this technology can help us in so many ways, right? Doing the tests can help a lot of people. And it
Right.
also doesn't help everybody. And you can get a lot just by talking to somebody.
Right.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important thing for everyone to hear because again, I have, again, the journey I've been on and, taking a year break from writing my book, a lot of other books came out about longevity and I was reading them and looking at them. And again, amazing books, amazing doctors and practitioners who've written these books. And they're also about a lot of really expensive technology, testing, supplements, things that are actually mostly out of reach for most people, either financially, energetically, or just like they wouldn't even know where we don't even know where to start with a lot of those things.
Right.
I still don't have like an Aura ring or any of those, gadgety things.
What's
First of all,
wrong with
because I
you,
think,
Avanti?
yeah, I mean, I think it would make me crazy, but it's also because there's like this feeling of, oh gosh, I have to set it up. I got to figure it out. And then I have to understand how to, interpret it. There's a lot of barriers, even for someone like me who's in this field
Mhm.
and is decently tech savvy, but
Yeah, I love
not-
my Aura ring, I must I've confess. But, um, but I love getting that biofeedback, but it
Mhm.
depends how you use it.
Yeah, and we've talked about this too, is that,
Yeah,
it can cause some people a lot of anxiety and other people it can be very, very helpful and it's
right.
sort of motivating to get outside and walk or, sleep more, whatever it is. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, we have gone all over the place here. Let's get back to the next mechanism.
Okay, okay. Sounds good.
Interesting things we're talking about. Yeah. Okay, so the second mechanism of aging that we wanted to talk about today is telomere shortening.
Yes.
And do you want to explain this one?
Well, I think of telomeres. I mean, this is not my idea. This is how it was explained to me once, but as the caps on the end of shoelaces. So the kind of caps on the DNA, and that when those caps are damaged, that then just like on a shoelace, you can get the DNA or the lace kind of fraying and unraveling. And so these are kind of like protective caps that are also markers that allow us to understand the health of the DNA. That's how I think of telomeres.
Love it. That's a great visual. Yeah, that's an awesome visual. And so the idea is that the process of this shortening of, of losing that little cap on the shoelace, the telomere, that increases as we age chronologically. As we get older, that will shorten, shorten, shorten. And then at some point when it's so short, that's when it causes problems in DNA as well. So that's how it's correlated to aging. Um,
And then it can shorten quicker, right?
right, exactly. And the things that shorten it quicker are things like chronic stress, more toxins, a toxic diet, poor lifestyle choices. These are all things that will actually accelerate the
Yeah.
shortening of the telomeres, which means that you are then increasing the rate of aging.
Yes.
And, there are studies that actually have shown that people who have shorter telomeres actually have higher mortality rates, which is kind of how they discovered that there was this correlation between telomere length and aging or mortality and morbidity. And so that's super important to think about too.
Yeah, I remember a study on mothers who are care. This is pertinent to me because this is me, basically. A study on mothers who are caregivers to chronically ill children, and showed that their telomeres were shortened so much that they lived 10 years less than their peers.
Wow.
Yeah, that made me stop and think.
Wow.
So, it's pretty daunting, and that's from stress, right? So
Right. Right.
caregiver stress. So, yeah, this is real.
Yeah, that's real. And that's the stress piece. And so again, just to show people, this is really we're thinking about this holistically because it's not like we're saying that, you're eating something that's causing telomere shortening. It's the stress from caregiving, which many people wouldn't even think about, as a problem or an issue that is contributing to aging for them.
Yeah. So, what's your longevity switch for that? Give it to me.
Yeah, the longevity switch is to add prana. So
Mhm.
prana is life force energy, and the main sources of prana are the sun, the air, and the water. And so how can we add those in? That's one of the main ones that we can do to really help sort of stop this telomere shortening, or, just so slow it down, not stop it, but slow it down so that it's not happening so quickly. And there's a lot of ways to add prana into the system, the life force energy, right? Adding the sun, something as simple as getting outside and getting that daily sunlight in the morning to reset your circadian rhythm, right? Or thinking about, what is your food source?
Mhm.
Because you're getting sun prana through food that you're eating, actually.
Yeah.
So, what kind of food are you eating? Where is it coming from? Where is it being grown? Are there pesticides? Is that decreasing the amount of prana that's in there?
Yeah, that so correlates too with Western medicine, the little that they've done on this, in terms of how to, there's a lot of studies on telomeres and stress, but then what do you do about it, right? But it actually does correlate because I remember, I don't know where it was, I can't quote it, but there was a study I read about caregivers and stress. It wasn't about telomeres, but it was about stress and well being. And showed that caregivers did so much better with just a minimum of 10 minutes of breath work a day. And so that's another way to add prana, right? And so I find that really interesting, just that the wisdom of Ayurveda parallels the modern science, right?
Right.
And really looking at the way I think about it in terms of breath and caregivers is that it feels like there's no time to take care of yourself, and yet, there's time in the caring where you can bring breath in and do some deep breathing and make space, literally and figuratively, for some ease. And so I think that's just really cool how it correlates.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I love this idea of, not feeling like you have to stop and sit
Mhm.
down and do a 10-minute breath practice, but
Yeah.
you can incorporate it into your caregiving, your workday, your walk, whatever it is, you can incorporate. You can find really, really innovative and sort of interesting ways to add it to your life, so that it doesn't become just another thing on your list of things to do, right? I feel like that's a big issue too for a lot of people when we start to talk about these practices, is that I have so many people who will say to me, okay, that just feels like so many more things I have to do. How am I going to do this? Right. That's part of the challenge here, is how do you add it to your life so it feels like it's part of your life rather than another thing on the to do list?
Yeah, that's why I like this add prana switch, because it really is saying that if you're so overwhelmed, which many of us are, by the to dos and adding anything in, it might be time to just take a step back and think about, how can I add prana to my day so that I have space and ease with which to make a change? Kind of, how can prana support me? And really, then what you're doing is, I mean, I know I'm getting a little out there for somebody maybe, but really what I think you're doing is asking of the world how it can support you, how the universe can support you back. And so I love this idea of, just thinking of it as adding prana in a general sense, whatever way that is for you.
Yeah. And so, like, the three main ways that I really kind of dive into in the book are the sun, the air, and the water. And like something as simple as water, right? Most of us are walking around dehydrated and
Yeah.
we are, 90 something percent water. That's what we're made of. And so if we're always dehydrated, no wonder we feel so tired and fatigued and grumpy and brain foggy and all of these, symptoms that many of us have on a daily basis. Something as simple as adding some water into your body is adding prana. That's life force energy.
Yeah, and I have to say that's my hardest one. Everybody has their hard things. I just cannot remember to drink enough water. And, if you really think about it, even if you think about it from an Ayurvedic sense, it correlates with how we think of it in the West. It also is that you're lubricating those different tissues, right? Your joints, your muscles, your fascia. And that if everything's dry, it's not going to actually work that well. And so I find that to be just in all disclosure to whoever's listening, I'm with you if you find that hard, because I just cannot bring myself to drink more water, and I want
Well,
it. I don't know, it's not a habit that I cultivate easily.
right. Yeah, but and also, you're also adding prana in different ways. I know that, one of the things that you're very committed to is your daily walk, because many times I'm talking to you and we're both walking. And, that is your way of adding air and adding sun, and you're getting that prana in through your daily walk. So right there, you're adding prana. So I think the point that, we're both making is that there are many ways that you can do this and add prana into your body, mind, and spirit. You just have to be a little bit, innovative about it or think about it differently, and you can do it. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think if you think about it in a way of not I need to or I should do, but
Mhm.
instead, how can I
Yep.
add prana? It becomes more of a less of a self berating kind of a habit to cultivate and more of a habit of something you want to be, right? Someone who adds prana daily.
Yes, yes. I love that. Okay, let's move on to the third mechanism of aging that we wanted to talk about today, which is epigenetic changes. Um, so let's talk about what epigenetics, first of all, is. Epigenetics is like sort of on top of our genes, is really what it quite literally means, on top of genes. And what it is really the way you can think of it is it's a way that the genes get switched on and off. Okay, like we were talking about longevity switches, these are gene switches, epigenetics. And it's really the gene expression either turning on or turning off. And that is influenced by lifestyle and environmental factors. And this is sort of a newer science in the last 30 years or so, 25 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think more like 30, but it's been only about 20 where people really are whole seizing onto it.
Yeah, and so this idea that our lifestyle, our environmental factors, these are things that can switch the genes on or off. And the sort of scientific piece of this is that there's a process called DNA methylation, where you can think of these methyl groups, the DNA methylation methyl groups that are added onto DNA. So they're like tags, and basically, what they do is they block certain genes from being expressed. Okay. And that process of DNA methylation is directly influenced by diet, stress, environmental exposure. So, right there, that's where the epigenetic piece comes in. So, epigenetics influences DNA methylation, which then turns genes on or off by either allowing the DNA sequences to be read or not read. That's kind of how that all connects together. And there are many studies that show that by engaging in lifestyle modifications, whether it's, improved diet or stress management or adding different routines to your life, these are all things that are epigenetic modifications that actually will slow down gene expression and actually change the epigenetic switch and turn it off.
And it's hard. I know it sounds really complicated for people, but it also is important to remember that it's estimated that anywhere between 25 to 40% of us have a genetic SNP, as we call it, a mutation, you can think of it as, that actually inhibits us from methylating most efficiently. And so this isn't just, whether you have stress or environmental toxins, but you might be one of those people who doesn't methylate as easily. And so it's just important to remember this piece that there are many ways to change this, but it's something for all of us to think about.
Yeah. And so as far as the longevity switch goes, for this one is the one that I really think about is syncing with nature. I find that that's a really easy one where we are modifying sort of our overall routines and lifestyle to really help change these genes and sort of like switch them off or switch them on, right? Whichever one's
Yeah.
protective for us. And so simple things, we've talked about getting sunlight exposure in the morning. That's a simple one
Yeah.
that will actually make an epigenetic change right there.
Yeah.
Simple, simple one.
I think it's really simple and I think
Mhm.
it feels really hard for at
Yeah.
least I've been talking to a lot of patients about this lately, and
Mhm.
it is really hard if you think about it. Let's say you have to get up and get ready for work, you also have to get your kids ready for school, and you have to get going, and it's kind of rushed, and, maybe it's dark when you get up, and by the time it's light, you're gotta go, right? And so it feels actually it sounds easier than it is, but I think if people really think about, what could I do? I mean, it sounds hard, but once it becomes a habit and you feel the benefit, it's not as hard, is to say, can I wake up 10 minutes earlier so that 10 minutes of the time that we're getting ready and prepped in the morning, I can actually sit calmly outside or go for a walk. I love that one and get some light in my eyes. So it does take some prep and planning, but it's well worth it.
The other thing that we can really do, what I think you're speaking to, is creating these daily routines, right? And sort of working them into our days in these small ways, the 10 minutes, wake up earlier, get outside. How can you add these routines that then are consistent, but also will decrease your stress levels, which then have an effect on epigenetics, right? So it's
Right.
all linked together. And what's interesting also as we're talking about all of these longevity switches is that you can apply actually all of these longevity switches to every mechanism of aging. I mean, that's sort of, the amazing thing about it, which you don't have to do something specific and it's only going to deal with one mechanism of aging. It attacks all of them actually. And everyone who's listening, you're going to hear this as we go through all 9 of them. You're going to be like, "Oh, I get it. These practices work on all the mechanisms of aging."
Yeah. And I think this one is really important for people who feel like their DNA is their destiny instead of a guide. I think about my DNA and my family is very highly um, skewed to autoimmunity. And that does mean I need to be more careful. And when I see symptoms arise, which I have, then I need to be really careful about making sure that I'm adding prana and removing toxins and syncing with nature. But I'm not doomed, so to speak, to the fate of my ancestors. I just need to be more cognizant of that. So I think that's a big shift for in the last 25 years. I've seen patients really starting to make that shift of not saying, oh, diabetes runs in my family, and it may, and
Right.
also you may do things that help that, right? So
Right, right. No, I think that's a super important point, and it's something we already talked about in this episode, which is, again, empowering everyone who's listening, empowering our patients and students. That's what we've been, trying to do, is to say that you do have the ability to have a very positive effect on your health. You don't have to look outside of yourself. Yes, there's so many people who can guide you, me and you included, right? And this podcast is hopefully one of the things that guides you and helps you along the way. And also you have the ability to do it yourself. And you can do it in these very simple ways. You don't need expensive tests and expensive supplements and, all this fancy equipment or any of that stuff. It can just be by simple things that you are going to commit to doing every day. And that will make a huge difference. And it's very empowering, I think. So,
yeah, and I like the syncing with nature one because you're really adding prana while you're doing it, right?
exactly. Many of them work together, and you're
Mhm.
actually also removing toxins
Yeah,
because
you're
you're
walking.
moving that you're walking and getting rid of what you don't need, so it kinda
Yeah.
all works together. Um, Okay, so we have talked about three different mechanisms. The first three, which is DNA damage, telomere shortening, and epigenetic
Yep.
changes. And hopefully, everyone who's listening, you sort of understand a little more about how these mechanisms of aging work and why they cause physiological aging. And hopefully, you're getting some ideas of how you can actually change that and increase your longevity. That's the whole point of this. And so, the next time we talk, which will be in a couple weeks, the second episode in this series will come out. We will be talking about the next three mechanisms of aging, which are protein damage, nutrient sensing, and mitochondrial dysfunction. And I know everyone is going to want to know this one because the nutrient sensing pathways are the big, big longevity switches that everyone's hearing about. So you want to make sure that you tune in for that one because I think a lot of people get confused by those mechanisms because there's four main mechanisms within nutrient sensing, and there's been a lot of study on those pathways in recent years because they're really sort of have been coined longevity switches, quite
Mhm.
literally from
Mhm.
Western medicine's point of view. So make sure you join us for that episode.
Yeah, and maybe we should ask people to, if they use a longevity switch between now and the next episode. I
Yeah.
really wanna see it. Like, they should tag us and
Yes.
or send us a message or whatever.
Yeah. Yes, please. I would love that. Let's do that. Okay. So, everyone who's listening, if you try one of these longevity switches, just tag us, send us a little message on Instagram, DM. You can, also email us through my website. There's also SpeakPipe, which is where you can leave us messages. We love getting messages. And so, me and Dr. Tanmeet will both hear it. And maybe we'll give you a shout out the next time on the episode.
Yeah, and if there's anything we need to address, we can add it to one of the next episodes.
All right, my dear.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do this again soon.